The rain slid down the hospital windows that grey afternoon, as if the sky itself was crying for stories still untold. Along the cold corridors, the hurried footsteps of nurses, the intermittent hiss of heart monitors, and the bittersweet scent of antiseptic formed the backdrop for the exact moment when two souls, destined to fall in love, collided without warning. Karen was crossing the inpatient ward, clutching medical charts, trying to hold back the frustration of a double shift, when, upon turning into the orthopedic wing, she bumped into a tall man, broad-shouldered, with an enigmatic gaze, holding a bouquet of flowers nearly soaked by the storm. The flowers, lilac and white, scattered on the floor between them. He slowly bent down, murmuring an apology, while she smiled awkwardly, unable to take her eyes off the thin scar cutting across his left eyebrow. The man wasn't a patient, nor did he look lost. He carried on his face the expression of someone who had long known pain, but who had yet to realize that he was about to learn how to love again. William had come to visit a former colleague who had been in a motorcycle accident, but the moment he met Karen, he momentarily forgot why he was there. She too forgot her exhaustion, the latex gloves itching her fingers, and the pressure of caring for 3 patients at once. When their eyes met for the second time, during a brief exchange about the wrong corridor and the right destination, something invisible, delicate, and powerful was born between them. It wasn't love at first sight, it was a warning, as if the universe, with all its cruel and beautiful secrets, whispered, "Are you paying attention? This is where everything begins." Karen pointed to the correct wing with a timid smile. William thanked her with a look that said more than any words. And before he walked away, he looked back one last time, and she was still there, standing, watching, waiting for something she didn't yet know she needed. That moment, hidden among sirens, pain, and wet flowers, would become eternal. In the days that followed, William came back to the hospital often, even after his friend had been discharged. He said he wanted to thank her properly. He offered a coffee. Then he brought a book. Then, a folded note with a simple line, "If I had been luckier, I would have met you on a beautiful day." Karen laughed quietly, but she accepted, not out of vanity, but because of a strange feeling of comfort, as if William were a promise of calm in the middle of her exhausting and lonely routine. Over time, the casual meetings turned into planned pauses. The quick conversations became long exchanges of confidences on the benches of the hospital garden as night fell, and the two pretended not to notice how fast time was slipping away. William listened more than he spoke. Karen spoke more than she wanted to. And without even realizing it, she began to daydream about that man who looked at her as if he didn't see the uniform, or the tiredness, or the mistakes of the past. He saw only her. Little by little, Karen began to wait for him, to count the minutes, to fix herself up before each shift, even knowing she would spend the day under a lab coat. The hospital, once a stage for her exhaustion and solitude, became the setting for a love in the making. And William, who had never allowed anyone back into his heart since his sister's death, found in Karen a new reason to believe that starting over was still possible. But fate, as capricious as ever, was already writing between the lines of that passion, the bitter taste of tragedy. Because even though neither of them knew it, both carried inside themselves pains they had yet to overcome, and secrets that, sooner or later, would demand to be heard. On the last night of that month, as Karen closed her locker and said goodbye to her colleagues, William appeared outside with an umbrella in his hand. It was raining again, exactly as it had the day they met. Without a word, he extended his hand, and she, with her heart racing, held it. Together, they walked silently under the rain, as if that gesture said everything they still didn't have the courage to confess. In that moment, the story of a love as beautiful as it was fragile began, as true as it was doomed, as eternal as it was cruel, and she had no idea of everything that was still to come. William was the kind of man who didn't need many words to fill an entire room. There was in him a silent, intense, almost impenetrable aura, as if every movement, every gesture, every glance concealed 1,000 stories no one had ever been allowed to hear. It wasn't arrogance. It was a refined, sophisticated kind of sadness, one that hung from his shoulders like a coat far too heavy to be taken off. To those passing by, He seemed to be nothing more than an ordinary man, well-dressed, polite, with a low and husky voice that always seemed to hold back something unspoken. But inside, he was a minefield, and the only person who dared to step there without fear was Karen. William's origins had always been wrapped in a discreet veil. He never spoke of his parents, his childhood, or where he came from. "I work with technology," was all he said. He owned a company that specialized in digital security consulting for large hospitals and clinics, but avoided details. His office was in another state, and he came to the city once a week. At least, that's what he said. Over time, Karen noticed that he always came back on the same days, almost as if he organized his life just to see her, even if he never admitted it out loud. William preferred to watch, to listen, and to make himself present in details. In the messages that appeared discreetly during her shift, in the chocolates he left in her locker, in the way he held her face when she was too exhausted to smile. Behind that calm exterior, there was something more. William carried the guilt of a loss he had never overcome. The death of his younger sister, Beatrice, in a car accident he couldn't prevent. They had been inseparable. He had been the one responsible for picking her up at the airport that day. But a delay, a phone call, a wrong turn, and she never arrived. Since then, William had become a man of silent promises. Never again would he allow someone to depend on him and end up hurt. Never again would he let someone's trust in his protection be broken. When he met Karen, that promise was put to the test, because for the first time in years, he wanted to protect again. He wanted to love, and by doing so, he was also risking loss. Even when he smiled, there was a shadow of melancholy in William's eyes, a quiet, restrained pain that escaped in small silences and unexplained absences. Karen soon realized there were gaps in that story, but she never insisted. She was not the kind of person to invade, and William seemed to need space in order to trust. Little by little, he began to open small compartments of himself. He told her he hated hospitals, but didn't explain why. He revealed he liked to watch the sunset alone, but never said what he thought about in those moments. It was as if he were giving her one key at a time, testing if she would stay even without the full map. And she stayed. Karen never demanded answers. She simply stayed close. William, in turn, began to leave traces of himself in her daily life. He would show up with homemade soup when she had a cold, bring her old books with notes written on yellowed paper, write unsigned verses, and leave them at the door of the nurse's locker room. And little by little, his defenses began to crumble. One day, by accident, Karen saw him cry. It was brief. He turned his face away, said it was just fatigue, but she knew. She didn't ask anything. She just placed her hand over his and stayed silent, and it was in that silence that he fell in love. For William, to love was like walking barefoot on shards of glass. Every step hurt, yet he kept going anyway. He knew Karen was unlike anything he had ever felt, and precisely because of that, he feared losing her. He feared failing. He feared that she might discover who he truly was inside and walk away. But what he didn't know was that, in time, her heart too would hang by a thread, and that their love would be tested not by words, but by the weight of a secret he would carry in silence for years. A silence that would kill a piece of him every single day. A silence she would never notice. A silence that, one day, would demand the highest price of all. Karen had always been the one who held everything together when the world collapsed. The eldest daughter, the responsible one, the girl who gave up her dream of going to medical school so she could help her mother take care of her siblings after her father walked away without ever looking back. She learned early on to put the needs of others before her own. At 18, she was already cleaning wounds in hospital corridors with the same calmness she used to hide her own. She was sweet, but not fragile, strong, but full of invisible cracks. She wore a wide smile to disguise the exhaustion, and her steady gaze hid every time she cried alone in the hospital bathroom before stepping out to keep caring for patients with an almost superhuman gentleness. Karen had the gift of easing the pain of others, but she never knew what to do with her own. Her childhood had not been easy. Her father, Braino, an alcoholic and absent man, disappeared when she was 11. Her mother, Bernadette, became both a cleaner and a seamstress, sleeping little and living even less. Karen learned to be an adult too soon. She grew up hearing that she was strong, that she was a fighter, that she could handle anything, and she believed it so deeply that she never allowed herself to be weak again. Her relationships were fleeting, almost always with men who didn't know how to deal with the depth of what she had to offer. Men who found her beautiful but demanded that she remain silent. Men who wanted her body but never knew what to do with her soul. That's why, when she met William, she doubted. She assumed he would be just another one. Another man who would see her as shelter, but never as a whole woman. But William didn't ask for shelter. He offered his. And Karen, though reluctant, accepted to enter. Slowly, she started to dream again. She began to look at herself in the mirror with different eyes. She started to wear lipstick again, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to live a beautiful story. Even without knowing much about him, Karen felt safe. It was strange, almost frightening. How could she trust someone so quickly? How could she let him see parts of herself that even she didn't fully understand? Yet with each meeting in the hospital garden, with every glance that required no explanation, with every note tucked into her coat pockets, she found herself surrendering more and more. It was as if William had an invisible key to unlock the places she had always kept locked. Karen was the kind of woman who loved with everything or didn't love at all. There was no middle ground. When she gave herself entirely. When she trusted with her eyes closed. And it was this immense heart that she offered to William, without realizing that one day, in a moment of weakness, she would betray everything she believed about herself. Because even the strongest women, even the most loyal ones, even those who spend their lives giving, also break, also feel invisible, also get lost. And Karen got lost. At the exact moment, she felt like she was being left behind. At the exact moment when William started to seem too distant, as if emotionally elsewhere. She tried to ask, she tried to understand, but he shut himself away, and without answers, she felt alone. It was in this emptiness that Bruno appeared, a new doctor on the team, kind, smiling, a good listener. He praised her, listened to her, made her laugh during breaks. It was dangerous. Karen felt it. And even so, on a single heavy overnight shift, when everything went wrong and William didn't answer her messages, she fell. There were hidden kisses in the parking lot, a whispered promise that no one needed to know, a desperate need to feel alive, desired, noticed. It lasted only a few minutes, but in her conscience, it would weigh on her for years. The next day, guilt crushed her like a runaway truck. She cried in the bathroom, washed her face, deleted the messages, ended everything with Bruno, and promised herself she would never tell, that it would remain a buried mistake, that there was no need to destroy the love that still had a chance to grow. And so she carried on, with a smile that became more forced, a kiss that became more tense, a hug that became more afraid. Karen believed every day that William would never know, that everything would pass, that time would heal. But what she didn't know was that time only hides what was never resolved, and that William already knew, and that his love for her didn't shrink because of it. It simply changed. It became a love that loves even with a heart in pieces, a love that chooses to die silently rather than hurt the one it loves most, a love that would choose silent pain over revenge. But Karen would never imagine that, and she would keep on living with the weight of guilt lying over true love, believing she was hiding something, when, in truth, she was being loved despite everything. Loving William was like learning to breathe all over again. After years spent in endless shifts, sleepless nights, and disappointments stacked one upon another, Karen was surprised by how easily he made everything feel lighter. They didn't kiss in the first week, not even in the second. The first touch of their hands took longer than usual, but when it finally happened, it felt as if the world had at last found a pause button. They walked together without hurry, shared silences that spoke more than words, exchanged glances that burned in their chests like cold fire. William had a gift, the effortless way he made her feel safe. He played no games, demanded no explanations. He simply stayed, present, attentive, whole. The first kiss happened on a Saturday night after Karen finished a double shift. She was exhausted, hair in a loose bun, dark circles under her eyes, her uniform wrinkled. He was waiting outside the hospital with 2 bottles of coffee and a blanket on the car seat. They didn't go to a restaurant or a bar. They went to a quiet street by a lake. They sat on the hood of the car, drank bitter coffee, and watched the moon reflected in the water. William looked at her for a long time, then simply rested his forehead against hers. Karen felt her heart race, but she didn't move away. And there, in that mix of exhaustion, tenderness, and absolute silence, their lips met for the first time. A slow kiss, full of care, as if he was saying, "You're safe, here, no one will hurt you." In the days that followed, Karen began living something she had thought belonged only to fantasies. William would send her messages during her shifts. "I had your favorite pie and thought of you. I saw a book in a store window and imagined your laughter while reading. Come back soon. It feels cold here without you." He met Karen's mother in their 3rd week of dating, brought flowers, cleaned the backyard, fixed the gate. Bernadette, always wary, looked him up and down, and then said the words that Karen would never forget. "This man is different. There's sadness in his eyes. But he's real." Karen smiled, but a chill went down her spine, because it was true. William was the kind of man who loved with his eyes, yet hid an entire world behind them. Their relationship grew at its own pace. There was no urgency, but there was intensity. There were no loud promises, but silent pacts in every gesture. Karen began to sleep better, to dream again, to walk hand in hand in the street without looking around, to feel whole. They started traveling together on weekends. They went to a small cabin in the mountains, an old house near the coast, a film festival in a historic town. In every place, they left pieces of themselves scattered like seeds of a love that seemed to grow effortlessly. But there were also moments when William would grow distant. He said it was because of work, that he needed to take care of some things elsewhere. He disappeared for 2 or 3 days, then came back with the same affection, but with a more faraway look in his eyes. Karen noticed. But she didn't push. She trusted, or at least she wanted to trust. One night, after a beautiful trip to the mountains, where they had fallen asleep in each other's arms, under heavy blankets and the glow of a fireplace, William woke up in the middle of the night, trembling, drenched in sweat. Karen found him on the bathroom floor, leaning against the wall, eyes brimming. He tried to disguise it, said it was just a nightmare, but she saw the trembling in his hands, the uneven breathing, the emptiness in his eyes. Karen knelt beside him, wrapped him in her arms, and simply said, "It's okay, I'm here." He didn't answer, but in that moment, without saying a word, he decided he would never leave her. Even if one day he had to bear the pain in silence, even if she hurt him, even if love turned into sacrifice. It was also that month that Karen took him to a lookout over the city and, with her legs dangling from the edge, told him her greatest fear. "I'm terrified of not being enough, of not being loved completely, of giving everything and still failing." William held her hand and answered with the firmest voice he had ever used. "You're already everything, and if one day you fall, I'll fall to the ground with you." She cried. He wiped her tears. And there, with the whole city shining beneath their feet, they made an invisible vow that they would stay, that they would endure, that they would make it. And for a while they did. But destiny does not feed on promises. It feeds on flaws, on silences, on unresolved fears. And it was already weaving behind the curtain, the tragedy that would turn that love into lament. Karen still believed that everything was under control, that what she had done would remain in the past, that William's heart was a safe place. She had no idea that he had already been struck, and that even so, he stayed beside her, whole on the outside and shattered on the inside. Loving William was like learning how to breathe again. After years living among endless shifts, sleepless nights, and disappointments stacked like bricks, Karen was caught off guard by how easily he made everything feel lighter. They didn't kiss in the first week, not even in the second. The first touch of hands took longer than usual, but when it happened, it was as if the world, with all its pain, fell silent for a few seconds to allow that simple and deeply meaningful gesture to exist in peace. William's hand was firm, warm, and gentle. Holding her hand felt like a promise left unspoken. You won't have to go through everything alone anymore. And Karen believed it. Because there was something about him that made her lower her guard, even when she was trying hard to keep everything under control. And with him, she began to take down the walls she had spent years building. Everything between them happened slowly, the way all things that truly matter do. He waited. She tested. He listened. She opened up. Those meetings in the hospital garden became coffees outside of work. Then came silent walks in the park, where he held her hand as if he were afraid to let go and watch her disappear. William didn't make exaggerated vows. He wasn't one for long declarations, but he had the incredible ability of simply being there, always. Being there when she had migraine attacks, being there when her brother called asking for help, being there when her mother was hospitalized for 2 weeks. He didn't ask, "Do you want me to come?" He just showed up, and that constancy, that mature and silent kind of love that doesn't demand, doesn't pressure, only shelters, completely disarmed Karen. The first kiss happened on a Sunday morning. There were no candles, no music, no wine. Just the two of them sitting on a wooden bench in the park where they always met. William spoke very little that day. Karen sensed he was hiding something. Maybe a hurt, maybe a fear, but she didn't push. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and stayed there, breathing slowly, as if trying to hear what he was thinking without needing to ask. And then, with the care of someone who doesn't want to break anything, he turned his head and touched his lips to hers. No rush, no hunger, no urgency. It was a kiss that asked for nothing. It only offered. And Karen knew in that moment that this man was different from anyone she had ever met. Their routine took shape in small gestures. She would leave post-its in his backpack with funny sentences and little hearts. He sent audio messages saying, "Good shift, most beautiful nurse in the world," at 5:30 in the morning before she woke up. They went out for dinner on the few days when their schedules matched. When they didn't, he waited for her in the car with a thermos of tea and a blanket. He never complained about the time, never demanded her presence. And that made Karen want to be with him even more. For the first time, she felt that she was being cared for, and without even noticing, she began to trust too much, to the point of telling him about the father who abandoned her, about the fear of never being enough, about the miscarriage she suffered at 22 and never told anyone about. And William listened to everything without judgment, with misty eyes, with his hand resting on hers, and with that heavy but comforting silence that said, "I'm here, and I will stay." One evening, during a dinner at her small apartment, Karen looked at William with eyes glowing in the kitchen light and said, "If this is a dream, don't wake me up." He just smiled, but inside, something in him broke a little, because by then, he already knew something he couldn't say. Weeks before, he had read a message on her phone by accident. He had seen Bruno's name. He had read words no one in a relationship should ever see. And even so, he stayed, because the love he felt for her was greater than the betrayal that hurt him, and because inside him, there was a kind of forgiveness that didn't need to be asked for, a love that required no confession, a love that, even bleeding, would still choose to stay. Karen, unaware of everything, kept loving, kept believing that she had managed to hide her mistake, that William didn't know, that the past had been buried, and so she gave everything. She gave her body, her soul, her plans, her future. They traveled together, talked about children, looked at larger apartments. They lived like two people who had chosen to become one. But there was something there, something she couldn't name, a discreet shadow in his eyes, an absence on certain Sundays, a delay in answering some messages, a tiredness she couldn't explain. And she, who loved so much, began to think she was being loved less. And it was in that silent imbalance, in that imperceptible crack that grew between them, that destiny began weaving the next tragedy. Because it doesn't matter how much two people love each other if they don't know what is being kept hidden. And at that moment, without her knowing, William was already carrying the weight of a pain he chose to bear alone, just so he wouldn't hurt the one he loved the most. That Friday's shift felt as if it had been written by a cruel screenwriter. A crowded emergency room, a choking child, an elderly man in cardiac arrest, a mother screaming in despair with her lifeless child in her arms. Karen ran all day, dirty, exhausted, with her nerves shredded. She even thought about giving up the profession she loved so much. When she finally left the hospital, she wasn't herself anymore. She was a twisted fragment of exhaustion and loneliness. And William, who always appeared when she needed him most, didn't show up this time. No message, no call, no explanation, only a frozen silence where his affection should have been. She tried not to think about it, tried to rationalize. He must be busy, maybe he's sick, maybe something happened with his family. But none of those excuses warmed the emptiness spreading inside her. She left alone, crying, broken, believing deep down that maybe she wasn't enough. Bruno was in the parking lot, leaning against his car with his jacket over his shoulders and a cigarette between his fingers. He wasn't just handsome, he was opportunistic. For weeks, he had noticed the empty look in Karen's eyes, the increasingly tired smile, the absence of sparkle. And he knew that when a strong woman begins to falter, it's because someone has stopped holding her up. With sweet words and exaggerated presence, Bruno had been getting closer, leaving coffee on her desk, making jokes only they understood, saying that William was too mysterious, that she deserved someone more present. And on that day, Karen didn't have the strength to push him away. They got into the car. The radio played softly. The city slept, and she felt her world collapsing from within. When Bruno's hand touched hers, she didn't pull away. When he whispered, "Come with me, just for tonight," she didn't answer. When he kissed her, she closed her eyes and pretended she was someone else. It lasted only minutes, a quick explosion of longing disguised as desire. But to her, it felt like an earthquake. Something inside her broke. On her body there was sweat. In her eyes there was guilt. In her soul there was the certainty that it should never have happened. She got out of the car with shaking legs, went into her apartment and vomited, cried on the bathroom floor like a child. And there, she made a decision. This never existed. It never happened. No one will ever know. The next day, she asked for a day off, ignored all of Bruno's messages, blocked his number, turned off her phone, spent the day hugging her pillow, trying to understand what she had done. And the cruelest thing of all, it wasn't because she didn't love William. It was precisely because she loved him that it hurt so much. How could she hurt the one who had made her feel most loved? How could she betray not only the man, but the story, the promise, the trust they had built so carefully? She decided to bury it, to compensate with more love, more presence, more devotion, to treat that night as a crumpled sheet of paper shoved deep in a drawer. And if it was never read, it could never hurt anyone. What Karen could never imagine was that that crumpled paper had already been read, because that same night, William had gone to the hospital to surprise her with a gift, a necklace with a broken heart pendant, to remind her that even in mistakes, he would be there. But he saw Bruno's car. He saw Karen's silhouette getting in. He saw the kiss reflected in the rearview mirror, and he felt his chest tear open so violently that he had to hold onto a streetlight to stay standing. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just went back to his car and drove aimlessly until dawn. The pain burned like fire, but for some reason even he couldn't explain. He couldn't hate her. He could only feel pity, not for her, but for their love, for the wound that now lay open between them. In the days that followed, Karen pretended nothing had happened, and William, with his heart in pieces, did the same. He kept being there, kept loving, kept caring, but something changed. He no longer looked into her eyes for too long. He began to avoid lingering touches. He smiled less. And when she asked, "Are you okay?" he would answer, "Yeah, just tired." And she believed him, or wanted to believe, because the lie she told herself was more comfortable than the guilt throbbing inside her. She didn't know that he knew. He didn't know how deeply she regretted it. And so their love continued, with an invisible crack growing every single day, like a crack in a dam, silent, almost imperceptible, but deadly, because there are betrayals that hurt, but there are silences that kill. And William, who had once lost a sister for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, would now lose his own heart for being in the right place, loving the wrong person in the most vulnerable moment. It was supposed to be just another surprise, a way of saying, "I care," without having to use those words. William had always struggled to express himself with rehearsed phrases, but he was a master at showing presence through gestures. The idea of showing up at the hospital at night, unannounced, with a necklace shaped like a broken heart, came during a conversation with his therapist, Barbara, who encouraged him to express vulnerability in a tangible way. He had spent the whole afternoon choosing the gift, hoping to rekindle something that, while still alive, had been dimming little by little. But that night, as he turned the corner near the hospital, headlights cutting through the dark and lighting up the parking lot, William came across the kind of image that needs no explanation. It only destroys. Sitting inside his car, he saw Bruno place his hand on Karen's waist. He saw her tired expression soften at the touch. He saw the kiss. He saw her hesitate, then give in. He saw what he had never wanted to see. And in that very moment, as her body disappeared inside another man's car, a part of William died. His blood ran cold. His heart, once urgent and alive, fell into a frozen stillness. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel hate. He felt something worse. A dry, absolute silence. An emotional void that erased everything around him. He rolled down the window, turned off the engine, and just sat there, motionless, for 27 minutes, without blinking, without breathing properly, not knowing whether to leave or stay. The gift, still lying on the passenger seat, seemed to mock him with that pendant that suddenly made perfect sense. When he finally managed to turn the key in the ignition, William didn't go home. He drove to the place where his sister had been buried, a cemetery on a secluded hill. He sat by her grave and spoke in a low voice, as if she could still hear him. "She did the same as you. Left when I needed her most. But I won't give up." The tears came hard, as if all the bottled-up feelings of the past years had chosen that moment to escape. William spent the whole night there, lying on the cold ground, his face turned to the sky. And at dawn, he made a decision that would change everything. He would not confront Karen. He would not demand explanations. He would ask for nothing. He loved her. And that, as absurd as it seemed, was bigger than the mistake she had made. The following week, when Karen appeared with swollen eyes and smiles more forced than usual, William pretended not to notice. When she asked if everything was okay, he answered yes, in a low voice, with his eyes turned away. And she, relieved, believed him, or wanted to believe, because the fear of losing was stronger than the courage to confess. William, on the other hand, had taken on a new identity, a man who loves in silence, even when wounded, a man who prefers to die inside, rather than hurt the one he loves on the outside. He kept caring, kept being present, but spontaneity faded. Laughter became a murmur. Touch became an automatic gesture. And even with so much affection still there, what grew between them was the ghost of everything left unsaid. Over time, Karen tried to make up for it with bigger gestures. She bought tickets for a trip, wrote letters, planned surprises, and William responded, but without the same flame. Because love, he still felt, but something inside him had been amputated. And the cruelest part was that she had no idea. She thought the problem was stress, work, time. She never suspected that he already knew, and that unawareness made the abyss between them grow faster than they could control. Even so, he asked her to marry him, not on impulse, but out of certainty, because despite the pain, he wanted to stay. The engagement was simple, yet beautiful, by the lake, where they had shared their first kiss. William knelt, holding a simple silver ring with a pale blue detail that mirrored her eyes. Karen cried, trembling, not because of the proposal, but because of the regret, because deep down, a part of her knew she didn't deserve it. And he, as he placed the ring on her finger, thought, "Even so, I choose you." That night, they made love as if it were the last time, with tears, with broken sighs, with hands searching for comfort where once there had been only desire. And afterward, lying beneath white sheets, William held Karen's face and said, "If you ever make a mistake again, just promise me one thing. Don't lie to me." She answered with a kiss, without knowing that she had already lied, and that he already knew. From that night on, their love entered a new phase, a love built on ruins, a love that bled inside, but smiled outside. And every day, William chose to stay. chose to love even when hurt, chose to stay silent in the name of something that was no longer perfect, but was still sacred. Because for him, loving Karen was like breathing, even when it hurt. The sky that morning was a rare shade of blue, not a single cloud, not a hint of wind, just a clear brightness, as if the entire universe had decided, out of mercy, to grant the couple a day without noise, without shadows, without bad memories. Karen woke up first, her face still marked by the tears of the previous night, but with a new smile blooming on her lips. She felt like she was being looked at the way she used to be, that something in William had shifted, even though she didn't know how or why. It was as if they had crossed through an invisible storm and had finally set foot on solid ground. While she made coffee, he came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered in her ear, "Let's go out today." "But it's a surprise," she laughed. Asked where, he only answered, "Trust me." That evening, they stood before the same lake where everything had begun. A soft breeze moved the leaves. The sun was already hiding behind the trees. William stepped out of the car with a small box in his pocket and a courage that only someone who loves deeply can summon. Karen stepped out, not understanding. He walked to the center of the wooden deck, turned to her with wet eyes, and then knelt. There was no music, no audience, no photographers hidden, yet the whole world seemed to stop in that moment. "I am not perfect," he said. "I have failed you in silence. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I have hurt myself without blaming you. But even so, every single day, I choose to love you." Karen brought her hands to her mouth. She was crying before she even saw the ring. William pulled the box from his pocket and opened it. A simple silver ring with a delicate blue stone in the center. "Will you marry me, Karen?" She fell to her knees with him, laughed through sobs, said yes without hesitation, kissed him fiercely, as if that kiss was confirmation that maybe, just maybe, there was still salvation for everything that had been broken. And that night, for the first time in months, they slept as if nothing stood between them, as if the past had been forgiven, even without ever being confessed. The ring on her finger seemed lighter than the guilt she still carried. But now, there was a promise, and she was determined never to fail again. The months that followed were filled with preparations, a simple trousseau, a modest wedding, invitations given to just a few friends and family. Karen seemed reborn, William seemed calmer, but the silence between them still existed, in those moments when one of them looked away, or when William said he was busy with work, and she pretended to believe it. Even so, their love was real, and it was in the middle of that love, between moving boxes and dress fittings, that Karen felt unwell for the first time. Nausea, dizziness, a delay she tried to ignore, but deep down, she already knew. She was pregnant. The positive test came on a rainy Monday. Karen sat on the bathroom floor with trembling hands and a racing heart. She cried in fear. She cried with joy. She cried in confusion. And when William came home that night, soaked from the rain and unshaven, she simply pulled him by the hand and led him to the bedroom. She placed the test on the bed and waited. He looked at it, silence, for long seconds. Then he lifted his eyes to her, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled with his heart. A broken smile, full of surprise, but real. He knelt down, pressed his forehead to her belly, and said, "You have no idea how much I needed this." The following months were a mixture of happiness and tension. Appointments, ultrasounds, sleepless nights, nausea, tears. William proved himself a devoted father before the baby was even born. He chose the crib, built the nursery, painted the walls with his own hands. But on certain days, it was as if he were far away, as if he were fighting something invisible. Karen felt it, but she didn't ask. She just tried to keep him close. They decided the baby would be named Bianca, the daughter who would come to seal what had somehow survived. At the hospital, when Bianca was born, William cried like never before. He cried seeing his daughter. He cried seeing Karen exhausted but smiling. He cried realizing that despite everything, love was still there, alive, real, present. For an instant, he believed that maybe he could forget the past. Maybe he could bury the pain. Maybe, Now with a daughter in his arms, the silence would finally lose its weight. But silence does not die. It only disguises itself, and what had been hidden between them still breathed, still pulsed, still waited for the right moment to demand its price. Bianca came into the world on a cold dawn, wrapped in the soft cries of newborns and in the teary eyes of parents who, in silence, tried to grasp the weight of what they had just brought into existence. Karen, sweaty, exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead and her eyes half closed, held her daughter in her arms as if holding a miracle. William was there beside her, standing still, looking at the scene with a mixture of wonder and guilt. He wept. He wept like a boy who had lost everything and suddenly was given something he wasn't sure he deserved. Bianca was small, fragile, with tiny fingers and eyes that opened from time to time, as if she already wanted to look at the world with suspicion. And as he looked at her, William felt something he had no name for, a raw, urgent kind of love that crushed and freed him all at once. In the first days at home, Karen dove headfirst into the chaos of motherhood. Little sleep, much milk, diapers, colic, crying. But there was beauty too. There were moments when Bianca slept on her chest and everything seemed to make sense. William, even clumsy, insisted on being part of everything. He learned to change diapers, prepare bottles, burp her. In between feedings, he read stories to Bianca, even knowing she wouldn't understand. He said it was so that his voice would be the first she recognized when she grew up. And Karen smiled, a tired smile, but grateful. For a while, their daughter seemed to glue the broken pieces of the couple together, as if her presence were fresh cement poured over the cracks of the past. But what is patched under pressure often breaks again. Time passed, and with it came new responsibilities. Bills, diapers, fears, exhaustion. Karen felt alone, even though William was there. He was present as a father, but distant as a husband. He continued to take care of her. He said, "I love you" at the right times, but his eyes no longer shone as before. Karen pretended not to notice, but her heart knew. On certain nights, when he was late coming home from work, or when he made up trips out of town for meetings, she felt that old cold shiver run down her spine, an uneasiness, a fear she couldn't explain. What she didn't know was that his silence was getting heavier and heavier. William loved her, but he loved her with pain. He loved with the weariness of someone who has been carrying a secret for far too long. Bianca grew up healthy, smiling, full of funny expressions inherited from her mother. But there was a different kind of connection with her father. When William picked her up, she stopped crying. When he played old songs, she smiled. Karen watched from afar, proud and jealous, because she knew he gave to their daughter a part of his heart he no longer offered to her. And that hurt, even if it was unfair to feel that way. One night, when Bianca was burning with fever, Karen woke up desperate and rushed her to the hospital, alone, while William, away on a work trip, only answered after countless calls. He returned the next morning, shaken. But something about that delay made Karen tremble. She looked at him and wanted to ask, "Where were you?" But she didn't have the courage, because deep down, she knew she also owed an answer she had never given. The house they lived in looked beautiful from the outside, a pastel-colored nursery, a tidy garden, pictures spread across the furniture, but inside, there was the constant echo of two souls avoiding confrontation. Karen clung to routine like a shield. Work, child, chores. William buried himself in reports, trips, and meetings, and even though they slept in the same bed, they no longer touched as before. Sex became rare, silent, mechanical. Kisses became rushed pecks, hugs, too brief. And when they looked at each other, it was as if they were waiting for the other to say something that no one had the courage to speak anymore. Bianca turned two with a small backyard party, close friends and family smiling for pictures. Karen prepared everything with love. William helped, but with his mind elsewhere. During the celebration, Bernadette, Karen's mother, watched them for long minutes. Then, she pulled her daughter aside and asked in a low voice, "What are you two pretending this time?" Karen laughed awkwardly, looked away, but inside, it was as if someone had ripped the air from her lungs. Because yes, they were pretending. Not a full lie, but a half-truth that had dragged on for far too long. A marriage held up by memories, by programmed gestures, by a daughter who had been born from love, but was growing up between two halves that no longer fit together. Still, they kept going. For Bianca, for the past, for the hope that one day everything could return to how it used to be. But love, when silenced for too long, begins to sicken, and the silence between them, though disguised as peace, was already a muffled scream threatening to explode. What neither of them knew was that the time to fix things was running out, because Karen's body had already begun to send out signs that something far more serious was on the horizon. Time, when it drags itself inside a house where love has become sick, leaves invisible marks that no decoration can hide. On the outside, Karen and William's house remained perfect. Well-kept flowers in the garden, forced laughter at family gatherings, smiling pictures on social media. But on the inside, every room carried a thick, almost tangible silence, as if the walls themselves knew the secret that neither of them dared to say out loud. Bianca grew up happy, talkative, with the innocence of someone who still does not realize that her parents no longer look at each other the way they once did. Karen pretended, William pretended, and the love between them, suffocated by a succession of silences and renunciations, was slowly rotting away deep in their chests. Mornings always started the same. William left early. Karen split herself between the hospital, Bianca's daycare, and the chores at home. Text messages were reduced to protocol. Good morning. I dropped Bia off. Do you need anything from the market? At night, lukewarm dinners, TV on, cold kisses, silence. The few tender moments happened when Bianca forced herself between them, begging for stories, dancing in the hallway in colourful pajamas, or drawing hearts on the walls. In those moments, William and Karen exchanged quick glances, as if, for a second, they remembered why they had once chosen each other. But the moment passed, and the emptiness returned, like fog that even when it clears, always comes back to cover everything again. On the outside, Karen seemed fine, a good professional, a devoted mother, a loyal wife, but inside, the guilt still pulsed. Not guilt for what she had done, but for the silence that followed. Sometimes she would watch William sleeping and rehearse a confession. She thought about waking him up and saying, "I failed. Only once, but I failed. Forgive me." Yet she always stepped back, because she feared what would come after. She feared losing him. She feared that he would hate her. And most of all, she feared hearing him say that. He already knew. And William, in his own way, also rehearsed every day the decision to leave. But all it took was to look at Bianca asleep in her crib, with the same little dimple on her chin as her mother, to realize it was not time yet. He would stay. For her, for the promise he made by the lake, for the love that still existed, even wounded, even crooked. It was during this time that the small signs began to appear. Karen started feeling pain, first in her back, then in her abdomen, frequent fatigue, a strange nausea that came and went, loss of appetite, weight loss, inconclusive tests, and an increasing sense of unease. But, as always, she ignored it. She put everyone else first. It must be stress. It must be the tough shifts. It must be age creeping in. Until the day, stepping out of the shower, she noticed a dark spot below her ribcage, an irregular circle, painful to the touch. She froze, booked an appointment with a general doctor, then a dermatologist, then an oncologist, and finally came the word that changes everything: carcinoma, rare, invasive, aggressive, already advanced. The ground disappeared beneath her feet. The world turned into a hum. Karen left the doctor's office dizzy, feeling her legs give out. She sat on a bench in the square and stayed there in silence, eyes fixed on nothing. She thought of Bianca. She thought of William. She thought of all the days she ignored the signs of her own body. She thought of all the years she spent taking care of everyone but herself. She cried without sound. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a real fear of dying. Not because of the end, but because of what she would leave behind. A small daughter. A husband who no longer touched her as he once did. A love that, even wounded, still deserved the truth. She knew she would have to speak before it was too late. That night, she said nothing. William came home tired. Bianca was asleep. Karen prepared dinner and sat in silence. He tried to talk, but she looked away. She tried to smile, but her eyes would not obey. William noticed, but he didn't ask, because he too was tired. Tired of not knowing how to heal what had never been spoken about. Tired of loving someone in silence. Tired of pretending that the family was fine when, inside, everything was broken. And there, side by side at the table, they ate like two strangers who share a house, but no longer share the same future. In the following days, Karen went through the rest of the tests. The diagnosis was confirmed. Stage 3, immediate chemotherapy. Surgery uncertain. The possibility of metastasis. And time, incalculable. She felt her body growing weaker. She felt her mood swinging. She felt her soul preparing. But she still couldn't say anything. She wanted to find the right moment. A moment when he was closer, more sensitive, more present. But that moment never came. William was increasingly absorbed in himself. The pain he had been hiding for years was also about to break open. And so they went on. She, dying inside and hiding. He, bleeding inside and silent. Bianca, growing up unaware that her world was about to collapse. And the two of them, still trying to keep standing the sandcastle they had built with real love, but on a foundation made of silence. It was hard to imagine that someone like Karen could fall ill. She was movement, life, presence. She was the one who woke up early even with a cold, who cared for her daughter with aching knees, who crossed crowded hospital corridors with a raw heart and still managed to smile at every patient. But the human body has its own ways of screaming what the soul refuses to confess, and Karen's body had been screaming for months, begging to be heard. The dark spot that had once been small now spread. The pain that had once been bearable now cut like a blade. The tests, increasingly fast and urgent, left no doubt. Hepatocellular carcinoma, an aggressive tumor, silent progression, a liver already compromised, and a sentence embedded in the doctor's eyes. We're going to fight, but time is not on our side. Karen left the office without ground under her feet. She walked down the hallway like someone floating on her own despair. The voices around her seemed distant, muffled by a continuous buzzing from within. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. She didn't know whether to think of herself or Bianca, but she knew with absolute clarity that she could no longer hide anything. Not from her daughter, not from William, not from herself. This was the time to face everything she had avoided for too long. The disease, the past, the betrayal, the silent love that had turned into a ghost inside their marriage. She needed to speak. She needed to free herself, even if it cost what was left of their fragile stability. That night when she came home, the house was dark. Bianca was asleep. William was in the office. She stood still in the hallway for a few seconds, as if trying to draw courage from the air. Then she walked in, sat down in front of him, hands clasped together, trembling, eyes fixed on the floor. William noticed. He asked if she was okay. She shook her head. And then, with the lowest voice she had ever used, she said, "I have cancer, William." The words sounded like a muffled explosion. He was silent for long seconds. Then he stood, walked over to her, knelt down, and held her hands. "We're going to fight," he said. But his eyes, which had always been steady, were now clouded with a fear he could no longer hide. The following weeks were a storm. Appointments, chemotherapy, side effects. Karen lost weight quickly. Her hair began to fall out. William worked himself to exhaustion to take care of her and Bianca, but the silence between them, paradoxically, grew even greater. Because now, on top of everything left unsaid, there was the looming fear of death. And fear makes people run, even from themselves. Karen looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. She felt fragile, unattractive, unwanted. She avoided undressing in front of William, avoided touching him, avoided speaking about the future because she no longer knew if she had one. William, on the other hand, was at war with himself, watching the woman he loved fade before his eyes. Powerless to do anything was a torture that reminded him of the pain of losing his sister. But now it was worse, because this time, the woman in front of him was still breathing, still smiling, even pale, still making jokes to hide it. And he, carrying the wound of a betrayal he had never revealed he knew about, felt he had no right to complain, that he owed it to her to protect her until the end, even if inside he was already breaking apart. He started sleeping on the sofa, said it was so as not to disturb her, but it was so she wouldn't see him cry, so she wouldn't see that he was already beginning to say goodbye. Karen noticed. Of course she noticed. She felt the distance, the kiss on the forehead that lasted less and less, the hug that no longer had strength, the trembling hands. And one night, while Bianca slept between them, she whispered, "Will you love me until the end? Even like this?" William answered with his eyes closed, "I will love you beyond it." She cried in silence. He did too, because there, lying side by side with a child between them and death circling around them, were two people who loved each other more than they could express, but who had hurt each other so deeply, even without words, that they no longer knew how to go back to what they had been. Karen began writing letters, one for Bianca, to be read in the future, another for her mother, thanking her for everything, another for William, but that one she never managed to finish. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should confess, if she should ask for forgiveness, if she should tell him she knew he no longer loved her like before, or if she should simply thank him for staying. Time went by. Her body weakened, and guilt came back, harsher every time, as if whispering, "You don't deserve this love, and now it's too late." But deep down, what she didn't know was that William had already forgiven her from the very first moment, and that his silence was not punishment, it was protection. And it was at that moment, between chemotherapy sessions, sleepless nights, and voiceless kisses, that Karen decided she had to tell him. She had to take that weight off her chest before death took what was left of her, because above all, he deserved the truth, and she deserved to leave in peace. The days that followed were the longest of William's life. Watching Karen slowly fade was like watching a castle crumble stone by stone, with the helplessness of someone who can only stand by and witness the ruin without being able to stop it. Each morning began with the fragile hope that the tests might show improvement, that her body might react, that the silent miracle of healing, the one that sometimes defies medicine, might come from heaven. But reality was different. Karen could no longer walk for long. Her hair was gone. Her skin had turned greyish. The dark circles under her eyes had deepened into heavy stains. And still, she forced herself to smile, for Bianca, for William, for herself, because she hadn't given up. She was still fighting, and her fight wasn't against death, it was against absence. She wanted to be there, present, until the very last second. William, on the other hand, kept the house running. He washed clothes, cooked, took Bianca to school, but his gaze was different, distant, dark. He avoided mirrors because he couldn't bear to see the expression of someone preparing to lose everything. He spent nights on the sofa, awake, staring at the wall, listening to the drip of chemotherapy fluids from the other room. Sometimes he got up, walked silently into the bedroom, and sat by the bed just to watch Karen sleep. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow, with effort. He counted the seconds between breaths and thought, will she wake up tomorrow? Sometimes he cried right there, hidden, holding her hand. But when the sun rose, he put the mask of strength back on. For his daughter, for his wife, for himself. Bianca noticed everything. At just 3 years old, she didn't understand what cancer was, but she understood sadness. She asked why Mommy was always lying down, why she no longer brushed her hair, why she cried when she thought no one was looking. William tried to protect his daughter, but he knew there was no shield against certain pains. So he taught her gently, "Mommy is sick, but she loves you more than anything." Bianca believed him. She kissed Karen's forehead, drew flowers on colored paper, lay down beside her to watch cartoons and said, "You're getting better, right, Mummy?" Karen smiled with tears in her eyes. She said yes, even knowing time was against her, even feeling her body fall apart a little more each week. It was during one of those nights, while wiping Karen's sweaty forehead with a damp cloth, that William finally broke. He sat on the bedroom floor, his back against the wall, and sobbed. He cried out everything he hadn't since the day he saw that kiss in the parking lot. He cried for his sister, for himself, for Bianca, for all the silences, for the words left unspoken, for the times he wanted to leave and stayed. He cried because, even wounded, he still loved her with everything he had left. He cried because he felt he would lose her before he could say that he already knew, and that even so, he had never stopped choosing to stay. Karen heard him. She was awake, pretending to sleep, and she felt her chest burn, not with physical pain, but with shame. For the first time, she realized that the silence between them had been destructive for both, that hiding the betrayal for so long only stretched out a distance that could have been healed with honesty. And there, lying with her eyes closed and her weak heart beating unevenly, she decided she would tell him, even if it was too late, even if he hated her, even if it cost her the little dignity she had left, because William deserved to know, because he had stayed, because he had loved without answers. And that, no one does without suffering. In the following days, she rehearsed what to say. She wrote, tore it up, wrote again, cried, asked advice in her mind from the sister she never had, spoke to God, asked for courage, waited for the right moment, and it came. On a quiet morning, when Bianca had gone out with her grandmother, Karen called William to the bedroom. He entered with tired eyes and an unshaven face and sat beside her. She held his hand tightly, as if it were the last thing she would ever do, and with a trembling voice, she said, "I have to tell you something. Something from a long time ago. Something that might change everything." And William just looked at her with steady, calm, sad eyes and waited. The room was in absolute silence. Only the sound of the oximeter marked the slow rhythm of Karen's breathing. The soft morning light filtered through the curtain with delicacy, creating an almost sacred atmosphere. William, seated on the edge of the bed, held her hand tightly, even though he knew that what he was about to hear had the power to tear him apart. Karen looked into his eyes like she hadn't in a very long time, with that courage that is only born in someone who has already lost almost everything. She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears, and said in a trembling voice, "I cheated on you, William. Just once. It was before we got married. It was quick. It was a mistake, and I swore I would never do it again. I loved you, even then, but I felt alone, weak, and I hid it from you for years." She closed her eyes for a second, waiting for the blow, waiting for him to let go of her hand, to walk out of the room, to hate her. But instead, William did not move. He just stayed there, looking at her with a quiet pain in his eyes, like someone who already knew, like someone who no longer needed the confession. And then he spoke, with a firm but soft voice. "I know, Karen. I saw everything that night. The car, the kiss, your return. I knew, from the very first day." Karen's eyes widened, surprised. She opened her mouth, but no words came. A sob escaped from her chest. She turned her face away, consumed by a shame so heavy it felt greater than the illness itself. But William gently guided her face back to him and said, "Even knowing, I chose to stay. Every single day, I chose to love you, even hurt, because loving you has been the hardest and most beautiful thing I've ever lived." Karen wept like never before, a deep, silent cry of relief, guilt, gratitude, everything all at once. She tried to apologize, tried to explain, but William silenced her with a kiss on the forehead, a long, warm kiss, full of farewell. He didn't need to hear anything else. There was no more resentment, no more questions, only the presence of love, whole, even broken. And in that instant, between confession and forgiveness, the two of them were, for the last time, in perfect harmony, as if all the pain that had separated them had been swallowed by that moment of truth. Karen whispered, with trembling lips, "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner." And William replied, "You were everything I needed, even imperfect, even wrong, even silent. You were my home." And then she smiled, a light, peaceful, clean smile, the first genuine smile in months. She closed her eyes slowly, and for the first time, she seemed to feel no pain, as if forgiveness had freed her. As if finally, after carrying the weight of that mistake for so long, she could leave in peace. William now held her hand with both of his, squeezing as if it could keep her from leaving. Minutes later, the monitor began to falter. Her breathing slowed. Air seemed to slip away. William leaned over her, pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "You taught me how to love, even when it hurt." Her last breath came soon after, silent, soft, like the end of a sad song. Karen left with her eyes closed, but with a clean heart. Because she died, knowing she had been loved, even after the mistake, even after the lie, even after everything. William did not cry at that moment. He just stood there, holding her hand as if she were still alive, as if he could freeze that moment forever. The world around him dissolved. All that remained was him, her, and the most painful silence that ever existed. The silence of absence, the silence of loss, the silence of goodbye. But within that silence, there was peace. Because love, even hurt, even scarred, even imperfect, survived to the very end. Karen's wake was simple, exactly as she would have wanted. White flowers, soft music, few people, no speeches, only the muffled sound of restrained sobs, the long hugs, and the tearful eyes of those who knew it had ended too soon. William stood most of the time beside the coffin, holding Bianca in his arms, as if trying to keep himself upright for her. The little girl, too young to understand death, caressed her father's face with curiosity, asking when Mommy would wake up. William only kissed her forehead in silence, without the courage to answer, without the strength to explain that there are some departures even time cannot fix. The days that followed were a blur. The house smelled of absence. Karen's bedroom remained closed for a while, her clothes still in the closet, the medicine still in the drawer. The notes she had left stuck to the mirror with optimistic phrases now seemed to mock the emptiness. William tried to operate on autopilot. He made coffee, took Bianca to school, gave her baths, told her stories, picked up toys. But inside, he was a broken man, because now there was no one left to share the silence with. And that was the kind of pain that made no noise, but consumed everything quietly. An absence that filled everything. That didn't scream, but suffocated. It was on a rainy night, after putting Bianca to bed, that William found the letter. It was at the back of the desk drawer, folded 3 times, with his name handwritten on the front. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable. He stood there, staring at the envelope for long minutes, his heart racing as if he already knew what was inside. With trembling fingers he opened it, and as he read, the world around him disappeared. The letter was raw, honest, beautiful. She wrote that she knew she had failed, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but needed to confess, that she loved him more than she had ever loved anyone, that she had never betrayed him again, that every day, through all those years, she loved him, even while carrying the guilt. And at the end, she wrote that his forgiveness would have been the greatest gift of her life, that if he found the courage, that he should forgive her, even if it was too late. William couldn't finish reading without collapsing to the floor. He cried right there, at the foot of the desk, like an abandoned child. The letter was not new, he already knew, but seeing it written, seeing her remorse in words, seeing the raw love printed in those lines, was too much. He felt angry at himself for having kept silent for so long, for not telling her he knew, for not giving her peace while she was still breathing. He had chosen to protect her, but now he understood that maybe, just maybe, she had left this world believing she was unworthy of his love, and that hurt more than any betrayal. Days later, he wrote a letter back, a release, a silent scream. He wrote that he forgave her, that he had forgiven her from the very beginning, that he stayed out of love, not pity, that every gesture, every silence, every moment of presence had always been a way of saying, "I choose you, Ari." But the letter was never delivered. It stayed in the same drawer, folded beside hers, because now all that remained was memory, and memories don't reply, don't justify, don't explain, they only hurt. Bianca grew, and William tried to move forward, tried to laugh, tried to teach his daughter to be as strong as her mother had been. He showed her videos, photos, letters, He spoke of Karen as someone speaks of a miracle that passed through his life, never as a saint, but as a real woman who made mistakes and loved with the same intensity. And at night, when his daughter slept, he sat alone in the garden and read Karen's letter out loud, as if she were still there, listening, as if somehow, in some way, she could finally receive the forgiveness he never managed to say while she was alive. Because the truth was this: she died without knowing that he knew everything. And even so, he never stopped loving her. The cemetery stood atop a serene hill, surrounded by trees that whispered with the wind and flowers that seemed to bloom out of silence itself. It was a calm, beautiful, discreet place, just like Karen. William returned there every month, always on the same day, always with the same ritual. He arrived holding Bianca's little hand, carried white flowers and a bottle of water, carefully cleaned the gravestone, and then sat on the stone bench beside it, where he remained for long minutes in silence. It was the only place where he didn't have to pretend, where he didn't have to answer questions, where the world stopped and he could simply feel. And Bianca, even as a small child, already understood that this moment was sacred. That day, the sky was blue, and the sun filtered gently through the clouds. Bianca, now 5 years old and wearing a light blue dress that Karen would have chosen without thinking twice, walked beside her father with light steps, holding a bouquet of daisies in her hand. When they reached the grave, she knelt down without being told. She kissed the cold stone and whispered softly, "Hi, Mommy. I'm growing up just fine, okay?" William felt a lump in his throat. He never managed to speak first. He always waited for Bianca to break the silence, as if her innocence allowed his grief to surface. Then, he pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a new letter, not one written to be answered, but one written simply to stay alive. He sat on the bench and began to read, his voice low, trembling, strained. "Karen, I still see you in every corner of this house, in the way Bianca laughs, in the smell of breakfast, in the silence of night. I see you when she hugs me for no reason, when she asks why the stars blink, when she paints her face with lipstick and says she wants to marry someone just like Daddy. I try to be strong for her. I try to be both father and mother, but there are days when everything feels too heavy, when everything collapses, when all I want is to lay my head in your lap and hear you tell me it's going to be okay." Bianca listened silently, her eyes wide and fixed on him. And when William stopped reading, she walked closer, climbed onto the bench, and wrapped her little arms around his neck tightly. "Daddy, Mommy is here, isn't she? Even if we can't see her." He nodded. He didn't have the strength to say more. Yes, she was there. She always would be. In memory, in the perfume kept in a small box, in the last toothbrush left in the cabinet, in the notes scattered through books, in the last photograph taken on the porch, with the little girl in her arms and her tired yet luminous eyes. William left the folded letter beside the gravestone. Bianca placed the flowers on the stone, and together, hand in hand, they began to walk down the hill. The wind played with her hair, exactly the way it once had with Karen's, and William, as he looked at his daughter, felt that a part of Karen had stayed, not in the grave, but alive, beating, breathing, watching over them. That night, when they returned home, Bianca asked to watch a video of her mum. William played one on his phone. It was an old clip of Karen dancing alone in the kitchen, wearing a flowered apron and holding a loaf of bread, singing a childhood song. Bianca laughed, William cried, and for a second, it was as if she were there, as if time had gone backwards, as if death had been defeated, and perhaps, deep down, it had been. Because Karen hadn't gone, she had only changed shape. Now she lived in Bianca's gestures, in William's faith, in the memory of a love that, even wounded, even scarred, remained love until the end. William held the letter in his hands, as if it were the last bridge between what once was and what will never be again. He was sitting at the desk in the room he once shared with Karen, now too silent, too large for just him and Bianca. The paper, creased along the edges from being handled so often, seemed to weigh as much as an entire lifetime. He opened it carefully, took a deep breath, and began to read, alone, to himself, just as he had done every night since the day he found it. "Karen, if you can hear me somewhere, I want you to know that I've read your letter more than 100 times, out loud, in silence, in anger, in longing, in love. I've memorized it as if it were a farewell song. And even after everything, even with the pain that remains, I still feel you in every corner of this house, in the smell of the kitchen, in the shadow of our bedroom, in the pillow beside me, in every fold of the memories that never found an ending. He paused, eyes brimming, his chin trembling, and slowly ran his hand over the paper, as if he could touch her through the writing. He continued, his voice breaking more and more with every word. You left believing I didn't know, believing you had hidden your mistake. But the truth is, I always knew from that night. I saw everything, the kiss, your return, the hesitation in your eyes. I saw it, and even so, I chose to stay. I chose to love even when it hurt. Because real love doesn't demand perfection, it simply endures. At that moment, he held the letter against his chest and closed his eyes, as if listening to her voice echoing in memory, calling him by that affectionate nickname only she ever used. Time seemed to stop, and within that moment William was alone, but whole, with her. On the other side of the house, Bianca slept, hugging the teddy bear Karen had given her on her first birthday. William got up slowly and walked to the door of his daughter's room. He watched her sleep, her face calm, her breathing soft. He went back to the kitchen and picked up a drawing stuck to the refrigerator. 3 figures holding hands, scribbled in crayon, a huge heart above them, and in the middle, written in crooked letters, "Mommy." He smiled with pain. He went back to the desk, sat down again, took a pen and began to write, this time with his own hand. Our daughter carries your smile, your light, your strength. She asks me why the stars blink, and I tell her it's you, sending signs that you're still close. She believes, and I need to believe too, because if I don't believe, everything breaks, everything collapses, and I promised myself that even without you, I would never let our story die. William wrote a few more lines, then folded the sheet and placed it inside the same wooden box where he kept her belongings. Inside were other notes, the engagement ring, the hairbrush that still held a few strands of her hair, and the first outfit Bianca wore when she left the maternity ward. He closed the box carefully, locked it with the little bronze key, and kissed its lid. He stood up with effort, like a man carrying the weight of an entire world on his back, and walked out to the porch. The night was cold, the sky clear, the stars shone with intensity. He looked up and whispered, "You died without knowing that I knew everything, but you also died without knowing that, even so, I loved you until the very end, and I will keep loving you, in every memory, in every step of our daughter, in every silence, in every word I never said, but you always knew." And then, for the first time in months, William truly cried, not from pain, but from release, from surrender, because he had finally spoken out loud everything he had never had the courage to say, and in that contained weeping, on that empty porch, under that starlit sky, there was more than longing. There was love, a love that, even hurt, even humiliated, even betrayed, chose to stay, and now, after everything, chose to go on. Because in the end, Karen died without knowing that he knew everything. And more than that, she died without knowing she had been loved with the deepest kind of love there is, the kind that forgives in silence, remains in secret, and lasts even after the very last heartbeat.